Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another monitor review. In this one, I'm gonna be taking a look at the KTC M27P6 Gaming monitor. This is a 27-inch 4K 160Hz monitor with dual mode functionality for 1080p 320Hz. That's buttery smooth. It's also got a vibrant IPS display with mini LED technology with 1152 local dimming zones and a price tag of $470. So it sounds like great value, right? Let's dive in, shall we? Let's start by talking about the pixel density. This panel really shines when it comes to PPI because of its comfortable 27-inch size with the 4K resolution. That's a lot of pixels. To be exact, 8.3 million pixels at 163 pixels per inch. This makes literally everything look extremely sharp on this monitor, even compared with some low-resolution monitors like 1440p resolution at 27 inches. Yes, there is a noticeable difference, and I'd pick 4K every day, even at 27 inches. If you have the power to run it, of course, because gaming at 4K resolution is not an easy task for a PC to do, or a GPU, but you got DLSS these days, and FSR4 and stuff like that, and those upscalers look very nice on a 4K panel, even with like performance mode. So it makes these 4K panels a lot more viable to a lot more people. Now, when you switch to the 1080p resolution with the dual mode support over here, things do look worse than on a native 1080p monitor at the same size. For example, text looks blurry and it's unpleasant to read in this mode. But that isn't a big issue because when you're using this mode, you're likely playing competitive titles, right? And oh boy, the 320Hz refresh rate is amazing for that. I thought I'd stick to 4K even in esports games like Counter-Strike 2 because I really like crispy graphics. But after seeing 320Hz in action and actually hitting more shots than usual with the AWP, I mean, just watch this. This is awesome to see. I really loved the dual mode functionality of this monitor. It gives you more options and it fits more people's needs as well because you have the crispiness of 4K for beautiful single player titles and then the absolute butter of 320Hz in competitive games like CS2. Let's talk about colors now. I used this Calibrite tool to measure the color gamut of the display, and I recorded 99.3% sRGB, 89.1% wRGB, and 95% DCI-P3. So that means that this monitor is adequate for some color work, not meant for professionals, of course, but if you want to edit a photo here and there, or like a thumbnail or a video or something, it will do the job just fine after you calibrate it, because out of the box it is way too vibrant and I found myself liking it in games. For example, in Dying Light The Beast, I was playing that game on my calibrated monitor that I usually utilize, and then I launched it on this monitor and it looked a lot more vibrant, and in a game that lacks a little bit of color like that, it makes a big difference, and I really enjoyed the experience more on this monitor because of it. Fortunately though, you can easily adjust these settings in the on-screen display, and if you use the sRGB mode, it will be more accurate. Moving on to brightness, and in SDR I recorded a peak brightness of 405 nits. This is already very bright, especially if you're gaming at night, but this monitor supports HDR 1400, guys. So it peaks at 1400 nits if you're playing HDR content or playing games that support HDR, and that is extremely high. And especially coupled with that local dimming, if you are into an HDR experience, this is definitely a great one. It gets way brighter than OLEDs as well, for example. And also guys, just a little bit of an experiment here. This is 27% brightness right now. I'm gonna bump it up to 100% without adjusting the camera, and yeah, it is extremely bright, and this is still in SDR, by the way. And if you're wondering about the lowest brightness in this monitor, that value is 33 nits, so it gets very dim. I've seen dimmer, but I don't think that's going to be an issue to anyone. If you require a very dim display, this does the job just fine. Contrast is up next, my friends, and here's where Mini LED really shines with that local dimming technology. So we got 6500:1 contrast ratio here, which is extremely good for an IPS display. Normal IPS displays without the Mini LED technology this one has usually have 1000:1 contrast ratios, so you can see that the color black isn't really black in those monitors. So the 6500:1 is an extremely good result. You can see the local dimming working right now. If I stop and stand still, the mouse actually dims a little bit, the cursor. But if I start doing this, yeah, you can see that it gets very bright around the mouse and it looks very good whenever you have these contrasty images popping on screen. And I prefer to play 99% of my games with local dimming enabled, even in SDR, which is great. If you disable local dimming, though, you can clearly see on video. I thought the camera wouldn't pick this up very well, but yeah, it just becomes a normal IPS monitor. So here's the true test of local dimming here, guys. It's pretty insane, actually. That difference is crazy. So without the local dimming enabled, this is basically a normal IPS display without Mini LED. It gets 1000:1 contrast ratios, nothing to write home about, basically. But it still has its uses like this, you know? For example, browsing the web and doing normal desktop tasks, I prefer to have it like this. And then while gaming, I prefer to have the local dimming enabled. And you can automate this, sort of, if you enable the auto mode over here in the panel itself, the on-screen display. This way in the desktop, and by the way, this is my desktop right here, it's not a game. In the desktop, it will stay without local dimming enabled, and then when you play an HDR game or HDR content, it will enable itself. But unfortunately for SDR gaming, I still prefer it with local dimming enabled, and there is no way to automate that. So you'll need to go here and change that setting, and it's pretty annoying sometimes because you know, you gotta do all of this. But let's move on to Backlight Bleed, guys, and when you have local dimming enabled, there's basically nothing to see here, which is great. It's exactly what you want out of a black picture, no light emitting from it. And if you disable it, you can see a little bit of Backlight Bleed, but it's really minor. This panel is actually really good when it comes to that, and overall, it's not an issue whatsoever. Now let's take a look at the all-important response times. To gather these results, I used the NVIDIA LDAT sensor and I tested both 4K and 1080p resolutions at different refresh rates with the 5 different overdrive options they give us. Starting with the 4K resolution, I have this table right here that you can look at. I tested it at 160, 120, and 60 Hz, and I'm pleased to say that the motion clarity of this monitor is very good. However, it comes with overdrive turned off, and the best way to enjoy this at 4K resolution is with dynamic overdrive. That setting adjusts itself in a way that it gives you the best response times and overshoot levels. It's a good balance, and I would choose it at 4K resolution. Now, if you want to avoid the maximum response times being above the 160 Hz target, which is 6.25 milliseconds, you'll want to utilize the standard overdrive mode, but that introduces a lot of overshoot, especially at 120 Hz and 60 Hz. At 160 Hz is not too noticeable, but again, I prefer the dynamic overdrive setting here because the average response time in milliseconds falls under 6.25 milliseconds, and the maximum is just a little bit above it, and it's not really noticeable. Theoretically, there is going to be a little bit of added motion blur, but in terms of clarity, it's really good in 4K. Let's move on to 1080p, and here I tested it at 320, 240, 120, and 60 Hz, and you can once again see that the dynamic overdrive setting will give you the best results. However, at 240 Hz there is a bit too much overshoot, where the standard one would be the best option there, but you can see that this overdrive setting adjusts the overdrive depending on the refresh rate, which is very nice. At the higher refresh rates, it gives you 2.6 or 2.5 milliseconds milliseconds of gray to gray response times, which is great for 320Hz and 240Hz respectively. The maximum response times in this mode do get slightly above, but we're talking about fractions of milliseconds, so it doesn't really matter. Motion blur is not noticeable at all. It has minimal overshoot, aside from 240Hz, where you can start noticing it a little bit. But in my opinion, unless you are locking your FPS to 240, you should use dynamic overdrive. If you are locking your FPS to 240, use standard, as that gives you 0% overshoot. So I was really impressed with these results, guys. KTC definitely knows what they're doing when it comes to tuning these monitors. Yeah, this one is a really nice one. Now let's take a look at the on-screen display. It is controlled by a joystick positioned on the back of the monitor. It is very easy to navigate and change settings with, but I do have one minor complaint. Dual mode isn't set to a quick toggle out of the box. You can select it and then it's only a couple of clicks away though, but I feel like this is one of the most important settings and it should be there out of the box. It's just a nitpick though. You can also enable adaptive sync here, which is very important, and it supports AMD FreeSync and NVIDIA G-Sync compatible. Definitely be sure to enable that setting so you don't see any screen tearing. Going over the ports now, we have a couple of HDMI 2.1 ports, followed by a couple of DisplayPort 1.4 ports, USB Type-C with up to 65 watts power delivery, which is awesome to see, a headphone jack, and the DC power connector. On the left, we also find two USB 3.0 ports, which is a nice addition, and the monitor also has a KVM switch. Talking about build quality, it's a pretty well-built monitor. It wobbles a little bit with the included stand, but nothing to worry about, and the materials used feel and look really good. I personally really like the design of this monitor. It also has RGB, so it increases your FPS. It's also super adjustable with full height, tilt, swivel, and pivot adjustments, and it supports VESA 100 by 100 if you wish to mount it. Lastly, I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of gameplay here while we talk about the conclusion. So once again, it has those great visuals at 4K resolution for AAA gaming, great smoothness at the same time at 1080p resolution for competitive gaming. Local dimming is great. Coming from an OLED, it's not as impressive, of course, but it's definitely a great solution for IPS monitors, and I think it has a place in the market, especially at this price point. The mini LED also makes games more immersive, in my opinion, especially games that are a bit darker, like Alan Wake 2. It really makes the highlights pop and those darker areas be more dark, which is definitely what you want, of course. 4K resolution at 27 inches might sound a bit like diminishing returns, but in reality it does look a lot better than 1440p, and these days with the help of upscalers and the fact that the upscalers also look very good, like DLSS 4 and FSR 4, you can run performance mode here and still make these 27-inch 4K monitors look better than 1440p native monitors at the same size, even though the internal resolution is 1080p when you're using like performance DLSS 4 or performance FSR 4. If you have the GPU power to run 4K with DLSS performance, and if you care about visuals a lot, you should run a 4K monitor with DLSS. Sometimes it even runs faster as well than 1440p resolution natively. So yeah, that's about it for this video, guys. I think KTC nailed this monitor right here. It packs some very impressive features like the dual mode and local dimming, and I'd have no problems recommending it at the $470 price point. Best part is, it's usually on sale as well, so yeah, I don't think you can buy a better monitor for around this price. I actually bought one myself. It's a dual mode 160Hz, 320Hz monitor, but it's only IPS, and I paid more for it than this costs. And that was this year as well. So I should have looked more into these. Definitely. Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one very soon. As always, love you all. Bye-bye.